so you didn't like the substance of what Obama was trying to do, but you at least grant him the respect of you felt he's doing what he thinks is right. So basically, sort of getting American influence out of a lot of things, which I think there's merit to a lot of that because we've messed up a lot of things, although often the vacuum ends up being a lot worse. So there's some unintended consequences.
I think with Obama, you see, and the portrait I made of him in 2012 was that here's a guy who doesn't like this notion that he is the defender and protector of American interests. It's the adjective American that gets him. He sees himself in a more Olympian way. He's sort of above the fray. He's sort of president of the world. And he can see that this America's pushing for some things, but it's kind of his job at times to sort of resist it. He's a global sort of balancer. Now, that's not what a democracy elects its leader to do. And so that's why I think there is a sense, even among his own supporters, there's a slight discomfort with the way he talks. He speaks a language that appears different from traditional Americana. And by traditional Americana, I mean the language that John Kerry would be comfortable with, Dukakis, Jimmy Carter, certainly Truman, FDR. Obama doesn't speak that language.
Do you think there's more of a desire these days? I think in the world there seems to be a desire that we want to become this globalized civilization. Now that's what you're saying he sort of wants, right? That he doesn't want us sort of above anybody, but if we're all sort of equal playing field, then things are a little bit different. I assume you're not into the idea of globalism in that regard, right?
Well, I mean, I love the fact Reagan.
What's the fear, I guess, is my question. If his ambitions had become right and the United States had sort of pulled back from certain things and not done as much internationally, what ultimately do you think the fear is for you?
Well, the fear for me is that I think Obama thinks that the United States, for example, let's take something like energy. We have 5% of the world's population, but we actually use 20 to 25% of the world's energy resources. We use 4 to 5 times our share. Now, the truth of it is, we mine a lot of that energy. We buy the rest of it. We're not stealing anybody's energy. So to me, there's nothing wrong with the fact that we use more or the fact that we have a higher standard of living. We produce more. America's a richer country. We have a very successful economy. So to assume that American affluence is the product of some global oppression is to me nonsense. We didn't take it from anybody. We didn't rob anybody. Even in places like Iraq, where we supposedly invade, we spend more money over there than we get out of it. Now, if we had been real imperialists, we'd go to the Iraqis and go, listen, we're going to be billing you weekly for all our expenses over here and taking it out of your oil revenues. Right. You're going to be paying for this, not us.
Now, ironically, isn't that Trump's position?
That's kind of Trump's position.
Hasn't his position been basically we should be getting their oil, we should be taking the oil? So that's really interesting because he, on one hand, is running as I'm not a neocon in any way. I was against this war and all this stuff. And at the same time, you're arguing that what he's really saying is that we should be taking, as long as we're there, we should be taking more.
You must almost think that Trump wants to be the CEO of Corporation USA. Now, if you're head of Corporation USA, you don't give other corporations breaks, right? You might stay out of this trade war or do this or that, but if you get in it, you're in it for you, and you fight for your team. Yeah. And so Trump is using that language of nationalism. Now, different than Reagan. Reagan was actually a cosmopolitan, different than a globalist. A cosmopolitan is a guy who goes, I like America, but I also like the world. Reagan was very comfortable with European leaders. He liked French food. He got along with Mitterrand. He got along with Margaret Thatcher. He loved Lech Walesa from Poland. Yeah. So while Trump would, to me, seem less comfortable in those milieus, Reagan wasn't. And I identify with that Reaganite cosmopolitanism. If it were me, the world would be a place of competing societies, all prospering, all trading with each other, finding no reason to fight and lots of reasons to mutually benefit from trade. I think this would create a global engine of prosperity. Yeah. And I would even have liberal immigration. I mean, I would have rules, so you can't just walk in the door, but we let in a lot of legal immigrants a year. I would just be a little more choosy about who we let in, so we bring in immigrants who help America.
Right. Which that's pretty much what Trump is saying. He's saying it in a more bombastic way, but that's basically, he's saying people can come in, but they have to do it legally.
Right.
Whether we trust, I mean, my issue is that I just don't know that I have any reason to trust our authorities that are doing this. That not trust their intentions, but trust their qualifications and their training to know that we can let in the right people.
Well, terrorism has changed the game a little bit because now we have to have this elaborate vetting process. In the past, it was simply a matter of do we want more doctors? Do we want more maids? Do we need more agricultural workers? It was kind of a simple, what does the country need financially? But now it's also become, how do you create a net so that the few bad guys that are going to try to sneak past it get blocked? And that's not easy to do.
Yeah. So what, in terms of the immigration thing, I mean, what would you say? Because to me, it's a two-pronged thing. There's a cultural problem and there's a religious problem. I see those things, and those things I think are intertwined at many levels. But where do you think we should be let? I mean, I don't know how many people we're letting in right now.
We let in about 1 million legally, but we let in an unknown number illegally.
Yeah.
The Islamic problem that Trump has talked about is, that the problem with the Islamic population is out of 1 billion Muslims, you have a fairly large number that are sympathetic to radical Islam. This is based on the Pew studies and the World Values Survey.
Also known as gross and racist, depending on who you're talking to.
Okay. Well, we're not saying that these are all terrorists, but we're saying that these are people who, if you said Hamas, they smile. Hezbollah, yeah. They like it. And this population could be 25 to 30% of the 1 billion people. So that's 250 million people. Now, this is not the same as any other group. I mean, you just can't find that many Buddhists or Hindus or anyone else that shows. So there's something toxic about what's going on in the Islamic world today. Yeah. Again, I don't think it's due to Muhammad or the Quran. It's due to something that's happened politically in the last 50 years. But here it is, and it's a reality. And so the truth of it is you're much more likely to have problems from a terrorist point of view with the Muslim population than you are with anyone else. Just a matter of the odds. And the question is, how do we deal with that?
So I would argue that if you were to look at 3 books, anyone that took the big 3 monotheistic books, that anyone that took any of these books literally, there is a tremendous amount of violence in all of them. But you have to look at the ideology because only one of those big 3 religions right now is acting out on it. So I don't mind what the books say because most people think they're metaphors or allegories or whatever. But if one group is looking, one subset of one group, just to be fair, is acting on stuff literally, then that's the inherent problem. So I don't mind the books as much as the people that act on them.
Well, as I mentioned, so Sherman and I are going to debate the Bible, right? Yeah. So right away, he's going to come out and start reading passages in the Old Testament, stone your kids, and this sort of thing, and all this sort of stuff. Adultery is punishable by death, and so on. Okay, number one, I don't think we have good evidence that even the ancient Hebrews stoned their kids.
Right.
Second, there was a debate in early Christianity between the apostles on one side, many of them, and Paul on the other, about whether the Christians should follow any of that stuff. And Paul won that debate, and the Christians decided, no, we don't have to follow the Jewish dietary laws. We don't have to follow their codes. Now, we follow the 10 Commandments, but we don't have to follow all those other rules. And so this is not some 19th or 20th century innovation. From the very beginning, Christianity goes, we're not doing that, right? So there it is in the book, and it is incorporated into the Bible. But on the other hand, it's not read as a code. It's read as an indication of how the people then lived under those codes. So I think I assume a certain amount of sophistication has to be applied to the Quran as well. There are the passages from Mecca, the passages from Medina. Muhammad said one thing when he was winning, another thing when he's losing. And so different Muslims read those passages differently. And also in the world, I mean, by and large, I would not feel unsafe if I walked on the Muslim streets of Indonesia. The Indonesian Muslims are by and large not blowing people up. I would feel a lot less safe if I were today walking, let's say, for example, in Iran.
Yeah.
There are Muslims in both countries, but their historical, their history is different.
Right, and that's where everyone gets so confused on. I mean, there's nationalities, there's ethnicities, there's the Sunni Shia divide. I mean, all of this stuff, and people want to paint everything with such a broad brush. It's kind of ridiculous. All right, so we don't have a ton of time left, but so I do want to hit on the atheism thing a little bit. So you've debated Michael Shermer, who I love, and you've debated David Silverman, who's also been on the show. Both of them, I think, view their own atheism slightly differently than each other, which I think is interesting. Are these debates purely intellectual for you, or do you have a sort of not a vested interest, but some sort of interest in actually trying to show Michael, if you're sitting across from him, no, you're actually wrong on this? Or is it really just the intellectual
No, I mean,
of it.
I sort of rediscovered my Christian faith in adult life. I was actually a very lukewarm, social type of Christian for most of my life, and I became more interested in it as an adult. I became interested in it less as an explanation of the world and more as actually a way to make your life better. And one day I was watching TV and I look and I go, wow, there's Christopher Hitchens, whom I know him from DC.
Yeah.
I actually once debated Hitchens on socialism in the late 80s. And there he was debating some pastor from Birmingham and just flaying the guy.
Yeah.
And of course, it was partly because the pastor went to divinity school and only knows the Bible, and Hitchens knows history and philosophy and literature and so on. And so I'm like, that's not a fair fight. So I kind of email Hitchens. I go, Hitchens, stop this. Come on, debate somebody your own size kind of thing. And I offered to step in the ring with him, to which he happily took me up on it. So we started doing these debates, and they were a huge success. I mean, you couldn't keep people away. And we did 10 of them, 10 debates. And then I debated Sam Harris and some of the other guys as well. And I find that the atheist community, it falls into different camps. I mean, they're all very different. You get the idea from a Richard Dawkins that the reason he's an atheist is that he's a true scientist and he's sort of looking for evidence out there, kind of like the Soviet cosmonauts who would go up into space and go, okay, report from here, no God ever found up here, we don't see him up here, that kind of thing.
Right.
That type of reasoning. Now, a guy like Shermer is more complex, because with Shermer, he'll say, well, I used to date this girl. We were in love. We were going to get married. And then she had a paralyzing accident. And so both of us prayed to God, like, God, come on, help us out here, cure her. But she doesn't get cured, or she dies. And he goes, that shook my Christian faith. So this is different. To me, this is not atheism. This is sort of like wounded theism. It's sort of like, God, it's not that I don't believe in you. I'm a little ticked off at you. I don't think you're running the world very well. I'm not sure you're all that just. See, this is a more complex atheism that, say, a Nietzsche would have been really interested in. And it's very different than the sort of just scientific atheism, which is that, hey, I don't see evidence for a God.
Right. So I think when you're talking about the scientific atheism, you're sort of talking about new atheism, which I don't even like that term, because to me, new atheism means just atheists who are speaking up. And I keep seeing them being attacked by the left, which makes no sense to me either, because these should be their natural allies who have no problem attacking Christians constantly. But new atheists, or whatever you want to call them, speak up about Islam, and that freaks out the left. So we end up with all these strange connections. I mean, I would say that for me personally, and I've talked about it on the show before, I'm not a believer, but I don't care what anyone believes as long as they're not trying to chop off my head. If you want to, in the privacy of your own home, believe whatever you want, and you're not trying to legislate on that, then I wouldn't have a problem. But would you say that some of the things that you care about in terms of laws are framed by that?
No, not so much that, but I think what it is has been, I've been much influenced by the idea, by Immanuel Kant's idea that the compass of reason is itself somewhat limited. So take something like life after death, okay? So here Shakespeare says death is the undiscovered country. We live, we die, we're flung into the world. We don't quite know where we came from. We don't really know what comes after death. Now, if I run into a Shermer and he goes, Dinesh, the belief that there's life after death is dogmatic and irrational, whereas the belief that there's no life after death is scientific and skeptical. I'm like, Shermer, why is it skeptical not to believe in life after death? In other words,
well, he's asking you for any standard of proof.
Right, but the standard of proof operates within experience, right? So, for example, if I were to say, hey, I just saw a guy with two heads, you'd be like, ridiculous. We've all seen hundreds of people and they all have one head. So the chance of finding a guy with two heads. But if I were to tell you, I just came back from a star 50 light years away, and over there they have two heads, you could never contradict me. You could never say that's preposterous, because you have no idea what goes on over there, right? So post-death is like that. None of us have been there. We have no idea. So no position has an automatic trump card over any other. If I were to believe in X and you were to believe in Y, neither of us has an automatic high ground, because we can't expect. What possible scientific test could we do to prove you right?
Right. So I fully get that example. But would you say that, look, if we both die at the same moment, every bit of any shred of evidence that actually exists would say that we we're mortal bodies and we're going to disintegrate and go into the earth, and that's that. It is somewhat of a leap of faith. You're asking for something more than reason to say that I think my spirit's going to go up to heaven. I mean, I know it's a nice thought, and by the way, I don't begrudge people those thoughts in any way. I'm not sitting here thinking that I'm somehow holier than thou, no pun intended. You know what I mean? I really don't. But there's some level of there's some reason jump there, right?
I don't think so. Well, I mean, Socrates didn't think so. Here's Socrates, right? He goes, listen, we know as human beings that we are a mixture. We are a mixture of the physical, and we are a mixture of the non-physical. And by the non-physical, he's not talking about religion. He's saying consider a thought, right? What is its mass? What is its size? You can't think of a thought in any physical dimension because it's not a physical thing. Think of an emotion, love, hatred, envy, So he goes, we know as human beings, we got physical stuff and we got some non-physical stuff going on, immaterial stuff. Now he goes, when we die, Socrates, he goes, it's obvious that the physical stuff will disintegrate. He goes, but what about the non-physical stuff? He goes, I think that the non-physical stuff will endure. It will continue. Why? Because it doesn't have the same perishable sort of expiration date stamped on it. Now, to my knowledge, no one has ever refuted this argument. No one has actually proven that non-physical stuff requires physical stuff, even in other worlds, in order to endure. So I just think, philosophically, if we look at the Greeks, the Romans, even pre-Christianity, all this stuff is there to be thought about. And the beauty of a good liberal education is you're exposed to it, you get to think about it, you realize that there are things that you thought were obvious that are less obvious when you reflect upon it. I go into these debates like that. I never quote authority, sacred scripture, the Bible. This is what it says.
Yeah.
I argue on the basis of reason alone.
That's why I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and that's why I can enjoy having a conversation with Michael Shermer, who would take the other position, and that's a beautiful thing. All right. Well, you guys can check out Dinesh's movie, Hillary's America. It's in theaters right now, and the link to the book is right down below. Thanks for watching, and we'll do it again next week.